Welcome to HCD's Mindset. I'm Michelle Nigella.
And I'm Kathryn Ambrose.
We are on a mission to help you identify what consumer science innovations have a lot of untapped value or are too good to be true.
So join us for more curious conversations as we try to make sense of the complex but fascinating world of human behavior. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to HCD's Mindset. We are so happy to have you here today. It is Michelle and Kathryn. We are back to say hello and really excited today to have Jose Rodriguez with us. Welcome to the show, Jose. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. It's just a few more days to Christmas, so I'm feeling good. Thanks for asking.
Isn't that crazy? I'm like, we're probably going to release this in 2023, but filming in 2022. And it's an appropriate episode to round out the year because we want to know about who you are. And you've had so much experience in the industry. And really, I think it's important for us to start with who you are. We always start with the origin story. So can you take us back?
I think that, I met Jose back in 2011. And so that's more than 10 years ago at this point. We worked together. I was on the client side, you were on the provider side. And you are just such an engaging person. And I'm so glad that we've become friends over the years. I very much honor our friendship, love it. You've always been so insightful. So I want to hear more about how did Jose become Jose?
Preparing for this discussion kind of was sobering and depressing at the same moment because I realized I started my career in the 80s. So when you do the math, 80s, 90s, millennium, and 2010, 2022, I've been working for 5 decades now.
Oh, wow.
And just to tell you who I am, I actually started in the 80s. I was in computers. I was in Redmond, Washington, learning a software called Oracle.
Oh my goodness.
Databases. It is the cutting edge.
Yeah.
Which of course, if I had followed that path, I would have been, not necessarily Steve Jobs and, but honestly, it's interesting because I thought that the industry was boring. So I went to grad school in 90 and did a 2-year program at Columbia.
For what?
My mission in business, and my mission was just to be a brand manager because I was so enthralled with Coca-Cola ads where different ethnicities held hands and sang and held a bottle of Coke. And I said, I want to be somebody that runs that brand. So the 90s, I actually didn't work for Coca-Cola, but I worked for brands like Hellmann's, Mazola, and Skippy in the food industry throughout the 90s. And then in the 2000s, I discovered the flavor and fragrance industry and started off with IFF, went to a company called Quest, which was part of ICI, which is more of a chemical conglomerate, which is something that the industry is trying to get back into now. It's funny how things change. But
I know everybody's kind of everything old is new again. So let's take a pause here. How did you find the flavor and fragrance industry? Because not everybody even knows it exists.
So I had been working as a product developer, I work with the Knorr brand. So Knorr is a culinary brand, and I work with flavor houses. So I've always found the art of making chicken soup kind of interesting without chicken.
Without chicken, yeah. So that umami, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So what made you have that transition though from focusing on solely brands to recognizing that there is flavor and fragrance is so much embedded in brands? It's not like they're really separate, but I believe that transition actually is pretty seamless because the brand there's so much sensory within the branding itself. So what drew you in that direction?
Well, so I always love hanging out in the test kitchen, working with flavorists. And so it's the fun place to be. Think about it. If you're a brand manager, right? What do? And most people don't know this. Brand people, all they do is stare at spreadsheets. Yeah. I don't know if that was my time, but because what you did is you looked up redemptions for coupons, you did GRPs and all these buzzwords for looking at ad, ad spend efficiencies. So the most fun place is to be in the test kitchen. Now,
Yeah.
it's not fun to be taking spoonfuls of Hellmann's, but I can tell you chicken soup, and if you develop ice creams, I mean, that's the fun place to be. So
Sounds
Sure.
like
to
it.
answer that question, it's the fun place to be.
Before we go any further, I have to know up front, do you consider yourself a foodie? Like, do you go out and seek out special types of meals now? Because
You know, funny you should ask this because I actually detest, haute cuisine, high-end cuisine. So in my previous job, we used to actually supply to major like catering establishments, like restaurants and hotels. And I actually worked with real Swiss chefs. And so when we would go to high-end restaurants, we would go straight to the back kitchen and meet the chefs. So
Yeah.
I was always involved in that world. And when you see what happens, and Anthony
Oh,
Bourdain
no.
wrote a book about this, Kitchen Confidential, you'll realize that a lot of kitchens are a lot uglier than you think,
Oh.
even in the high-end places. And a little thing that Bourdain probably never said in his book is most chefs cook with their fingers, their
Yeah.
hands. So to determine the steak, if it's ready or not, they don't put a thermometer
Right
in.
in.
They use their thumb. And then when they get the proteins, they actually use their hands to move it around
I
because they
mean,
can't use tongs, right? They're moving around the kitchen. Anyways, long story short is I'm not a hot cuisine person. I know fine dining, but you know what? Guess where the chefs usually go when they're done with their shifts? They have pizzas. They really do. So go on.
so when you were talking about being in brand marketing, how do you think that actually helped you with the idea of going into the space of flavor and fragrance? What part of, you were saying you look at spreadsheets all days, but there is something really special about being closely tied and almost like having this close connection to the brand that could be translated into skills that you might need for exploring flavor and fragrance. So do you have any characteristics or anything like that really stand out to you that you were able to transition into this new space?
So when I started at IFF, I was actually the first person in the industry. I could say that pretty clearly because the people I worked with, first of all, at the time, IFF was the biggest company in the flavor and fragrance industry. And I was the first kind of guinea pig who actually came from the consumer side,
Oh, wow.
product side, that worked in marketing. So I asked dumb questions like, hey, we're making this fragrance. Are we testing it with the right demographic? Like, what?
Not a dumb
Because,
question.
Now we know
again,
that that's very important.
right. And now, of course, things got more sophisticated. And of course, the industry are now hiring people. But basically, yeah. I mean, for me, I saw a lot of things that could really be improved in the industry just to fine tune the focus on consumer. Although, like, having said that, I actually feel that the industry, the flavor fragrance industry, and as well as the packaged goods industry, we haven't really changed much in terms of how we do our consumer probe. There's a lot
Yeah.
we don't understand. And
Wow.
we still, Michelle, I always jokingly, I tell you this, like, when I walked into a market research department in 1991, it was probably the same thing, exactly the same kind of environment, except today we have iPads. But back then you had a piece of paper and a pencil, and it was
Yeah.
a pencil like this or whatever. But for the most part, we're still asking questions the exact same way. We're putting
very
the
true.
thing, a door opens and something is slid over, and people are making these comments. And I think there's got to be something better than that.
Yeah.
And, I've got a few thoughts because, if you think about the most successful innovations, and unfortunately, the only ones I can think of are non-food, that's Tesla and the iPhone and,
Yeah.
and Apple, right? So Tesla being the way the car is run and driven. It's completely like game changing, and so is what Apple, the iPhone, iWatches has done to our lives, right? Just completely changed us.
Yeah.
And in neither of those cases, the inventors and people behind them never really used consumer. Now, when I say consumer, that's not to say we shouldn't be probing consumers, and that's why I think I definitely have a lot of interest for neuroscience, which is why in my consulting, when I connected back with you, Michelle, I really think that neuroscience is the next way forward in product development and testing. I don't know how yet. I've been working with you guys now for a few years with some introductions on various industries, but don't give up the chase. And I think that there's a lot of good things forward, and we just have to put our minds together and
I
figure out
absolutely
the way
agree.
forward.
I think a big thing too, and it really goes along with what you were saying, is like, don't forget about the consumer, is a topic that we talk a lot about, which is the idea of perception really being reality. So you need to know what the consumer is thinking and what they are experiencing from their perspective, in order to make sure that you are innovating in a way that they will take note of and appreciate. Because quite often, a lot of innovations might seem really great on paper, but then if the consumer doesn't realize that it even exists, why would they spend the extra money or, want the extra thing? They don't really actually notice the difference in it. So do you have any thoughts on that notion of perception being reality?
So that's a really tricky question, because perception, there's two forms of perception. For perception, which is the conscious and unconscious. And when I say conscious, it's because when you ask somebody, how do you feel? I mean, if you have to even think about it,
it's changed.
Typically it's changed. There's a filter. I mean, that's why for me, when you go through the airport and they take your temperature probe, they're not asking you, hey, do you feel like fatigue and you have COVID and et cetera. They're taking a physical measurement of your body property. And they already know that chances are, if you are above, a certain, Celsius level, you are a high likely target. And I think maybe Michelle and Kathryn, there could be a bit of a clue here, in terms of what we could be doing, because it's very hard to always ask people to judge themselves.
Yes.
And
they're not very good at articulating that, right?
Or they might have reasons to not articulate in how they really wish to feel. And as we know, there are cultural norms too. There are cultures that don't want to be negative. And there are cultures that always want to be positive.
Yeah. One of the major things in research is the idea of demand effects. So it's that the person who is being tested, the participant, doesn't want to offend or say the wrong thing. And so they'll try to cater their answers to make the researcher happy, which in turn biases them. So it goes along again with making sure that your data is actually useful and valuable and authentic. I think that's really crucial, because, bad data is just going to be bad data. It's not actually going to help you make those innovations and make those insights.
And, I'll share a little side bar story on that. I mean, we've all attended focus groups, and we all know who attended and personally commissioned focus groups. We always say it's all about the moderator. And why is it all about the moderator? Because the moderator is injecting a personality.
Yes.
If the guy running it is like Seinfeld, I mean, you'll get incredible results, like Jerry Seinfeld. You'll get whatever. But I've also seen moderators who are dry as they come.
Yeah.
Who shouldn't even be reading, I don't know, who shouldn't be reading the Constitution. It's so boring. But, I don't know. And why? So just think about that for a second. Like, why?
Yeah.
And it's because we all know inherently that if there's an interface, there's a halo effect that person, the Jerry Seinfeld, is portraying to the group, and that's leading, swaying, biasing all the data you're going to get back.
Well, it's biasing you too, because you find them engaging, right? And so then you're going to already be predisposed to love whatever they give you, right? I mean, if Jerry Seinfeld was just making cookies, you'd still be like, oh my goodness, these are the best cookies everywhere.
That's right. But, and what's interesting is that, again, these are some of the fallacies that I've seen in 5 decades. And the other thing that I'm going to drop a bomb to anybody that bothers to listen to us, and I hope there's more than just the three of us. Actually, the little dirty secret in our fragrance industry is that fine fragrance. So we're talking about like Chanel No. 5. We're talking about like these brands and J'adore and all that. These fragrances are not produced with consumer data.
Yeah.
So think about it. In the fragrance industry, right?
Yeah.
The very essence of the industry, the highest of high, there's no consumer data typically used for these projects. They are run by experts and professionals in the industry who basically know where the
Yeah.
industry is going.
Like it's
But
an art.
really, really think about that, right? And that's the ultimate high, like, because there's two spheres in flavors and fragrances. One is, you're producing something that's completely hedonic and just for pleasure, right?
Yeah.
And then there are flavor and fragrances that are functional.
Yeah.
So the functional case in flavors is, let's say, your medicines. If there wasn't the flavor, even though we all hate the cherry flavor, but if there was no flavor, you would not be able to drink the cough syrup. Your stomach
Sure.
would just throw it out.
Yeah.
And in the fragrance side, things like bar soaps and whatever. I mean, they look back at the turn of the century, the 20th century, and they said that, like, back in those days, the industry was using like fatty soaps. I mean, fats. I mean, from animals. So if
Yeah.
you didn't put a fragrance, I mean, you would smell like cowhide. Who wants that? So anyway, so that's the functional side. And really, so again, going back, is that on the high fragrance side, there's no testing done.
So,
And
it's
really, we
interesting
have
you
to
say
pause and think
that,
about
and you were
that.
talking about Coca-Cola. You know, if you were to smell these fine fragrances blind, then people's ratings would be quite different, right? So I think a lot of, like, when people like, say, Chanel No. 5, it's because they identify it like, oh, that's Chanel. But if they didn't know that it was Chanel No. 5, would they like it?
Right. It's almost the association of the brand is
Yeah.
really what's driving liking
Yeah.
in that sense.
Because then, like the Coke and Pepsi challenge, right? When people tasted Coke and Pepsi blind, they preferred Pepsi, but as soon as you put the brand on it, they preferred Coke.
Yeah. It's very interesting, especially when you are discussing, again, just that concept of perception is reality, because there's no doubt in it that the people that are the decision makers in the flavor and fragrance space, like, they know their stuff, they're experts in their field. But it does make me wonder a bit what it would be like if we actually did the consumer testing on something like Chanel No. 5. Would consumers truly love it the same way if they didn't realize that Chanel No. 5 was Chanel No. 5, And
There's a house that's actually done that before. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the data I recall seeing in a Chanel No. 5 was negative.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was negative.
'Cause
Shown
it's-
to people
yeah.
who don't know what they're smelling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is very distinctive, but that's
Yeah.
part of the design, right? Yeah. So that is really interesting. So when you talk about, things like that, the way distinctive flavors and distinctive fragrances are designed, and your intrigue of going back in the test kitchens and experiencing these things, you've worked with these flavorists and these perfumers. And a lot of them are scientists, right? So like the hardcore scientists, or maybe they are the rock star perfumists, right? That are it's almost like an art, right? To create these things. What is that experience like? Like, from your branding view, going back and being in that test kitchen and seeing these scientists that are really focusing on, the gas chromatography of the molecules or whatever it might be. What is your experience in working with them?
So having worked on both sides, flavor and fragrance, the fragrance creation part is they're really more like artists, as in like painters.
Mm-hmm.
They are really brilliant with what they do, and they can create Monets and Picassos and all that with aromacochemical ingredients. The flavor side, I have to demystify that a little bit, because the formulations are very simple, typically in the flavor side. I mean, if you want bubblegum, you want grape, it's just, it's grape. They put modifiers in the background, but for the most part, people want things that are identifiable. Although Coca-Cola is trying to confuse us now with Starlight flavor Coke. But typically, when you consume something, you want to identify it. So because of that, flavorists are told, give me an apricot, give me a peach, give me a mango, right? Whereas perfumers really are dealing with the abstract.
Yeah.
So it's quite a different experience, but that's not to detract from flavorists, because they also have to be brilliant, because flavorists have to deliver the experience in a medium. So don't forget, if there's ice cream involved, there's fats and other things that, kind of mix with the palate, and you still got to make it taste like a mango that was just cut from a tree and put on a spoon.
I think that's a really interesting point to bring up about the distinction between flavor and fragrance, because even just the language that we have around fragrance is so limited. And the way that, at least the way that I see consumers try to get around that is through analogies. They'll say, oh, this reminds me of our Christmas holiday season when we're all around the cookies or whatever, because they're doing what you were saying. They're trying to connect it to something they can relate to. And they'll be like, oh, that smells like sugar cookies, or it smells like this or that, because there aren't really that many attributes out there to describe fragrances, which is probably a huge challenge in consumer testing.
Well, I mean, the olfactory areas of the brain are very intertwined with our memory centers as well. So I think that is a large part of that as well. But sorry, Jose, you were going to say.
No, I mean, just to amplify your point, Kathryn, and actually the younger the consumer is when we tested our industry, the more they always revert back to food. Because what else do they know? They don't use Chanel number 5s when you're like, 12 years old. So everything is associated to a candy, a bubble gum, a cake, an experience. And I don't know, Michelle and Kathryn as well, what the future holds, but, because fragrances are becoming less and less of a staple in, like with Gen Zers. I mean, they consume them, but it's not at the same level. It's not for luxury. It's not for self-indulgence. I wonder if going forward, I mean, really, the language of food should be more intertwined with fragrance testing.
That's interesting.
Because the vocabulary is just going to be more focused there. When I was growing up, I mean, I knew men's fragrances. I even knew Polo Ralph Lauren because, in the same way, some generations experience Abercrombie and Fitch, the stores, and who
walking in the mall.
I remember that.
There are people now
just
who
unlocked
walk around,
a core
they don't even know
memory.
what that smells like.
Yeah, because who walks in a mall anymore, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, I think there's some interesting things to sort of explore there. One is thinking like I want to touch on before we go into like sort of the future of the industry, but you've mentioned houses like flavor houses and fragrance houses, and I think there are a lot of people that don't even know that those things exist. But so just kind of describing what that whole situation is, that there are these houses and they're competing to say, put the fragrance into a shampoo that everybody uses all the time, right? Or, into your, the Bath and Body Works sprays. But there's intense competition among these houses to get their ingredient in. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is yes. I mean, the companies that produce products, if it's candies or ice cream, or as you said, like, personal care products, they work with suppliers to create these experiences for them. And the onus on finding the next big idea or what's going to hit with the market is placed on these companies, these flavor and fragrance companies.
So the end client is really relying on the supplier to do.
And I'm representing that industry, working it a lot. And I can tell you that the challenge is really acute, because as the FMCGs are becoming just more shells of their former past. And when I say shells, with venture capitalists and all that taking over, none of these people really know the industry. They're just buying it as a financial investment.
Yeah.
So now they have to rely on these houses. And I can tell you the houses are really struggling to, find the next big idea.
Yeah.
Seems like the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Just trying to, it's like you said, get the next big idea, have the next Chanel number 5, basically.
Yeah.
So as they're trying to do that, and more of the sort of research is then being placed on the houses, on the supplier to do that consumer research, have you seen, over time, have the consumer research and insights groups within the houses grown? Has the research changed?
So I think I alluded to that earlier. The research hasn't really changed other than iPads.
So they're not really meeting this new demand.
No, and honestly, and really, we've played around with neuroscience in the industry for a decade now, and I don't think anyone really has traction. But if you really think about it, I mean, so I looked up the word hedonics, right? Because we use that a lot in the industry. And again, in preparation for this talk, I figured let's look at even some vocabulary. So
Mhm.
hedonics, I looked up in Merriam-Webster. Actually, it's a branch of psychology that deals with pleasant and unpleasant states of consciousness. So it's a psychology.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yet we use the word hedonics to just denote like how something smells,
Yeah.
like it or don't like it. But there's the word psychology. So by psychology, and
Wow.
it's not that I want to get like, functional here in the definition, but, I really think even just using that word hedonic, we need to find out like what are the motivations? What are the drivers to make somebody happy, sad, and whatever? And I think that is the future. I mean, many houses now are publishing their data about mood arousals and, in various states. And I think that is the future. We need to keep on pushing that.
So this might be a big question, but I would love to have your input on basically just explaining a bit more how how you can help your clients utilize the research better, because you mentioned that they really haven't changed that much, but the way that they're using it and the way that people live in their lives and the way that they use fragrances has changed. So what would your recommendation be, and what advice would you give to people to really maximize the insights that they have from whatever research they're doing? Is it really understanding the true meaning of heuristics and psychology of the person?
So the first thing I would say is what is the actual outcome? Like what is the product in the product space? So as I defined, right, there are products that have a functional performance, so to make the medicine taste better, and there's fine fragrance, which you spritz on yourself and imbue your attraction to get for somebody else's, to change somebody else's perception.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's really what the fine fragrance is. Otherwise, why put it on? If
Mhm.
everyone had COVID, then, people aren't going to be using fine fragrances anymore because
Good
nobody can
point.
smell you. So anyway, so understanding that I think is fundamental, because we in the industry confuse that. So I mean, a really easy way to think of this is that if the product is an antiperspirant, deodorant, you should really just be focusing on how well it covers the unpleasant odors,
Mhm.
period. There shouldn't be any, and this makes me feel like I'm jumping off a cliff in Punta Cana. I mean, who cares if you're jumping off a cliff in Punta Cana? But if your armpit smells like after 30 minutes, so and really you laugh, but
It's
we
true.
confuse these
True.
objectives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the problem is also shame on the companies who are briefing this, because they're sending us the wrong targets, right? So again,
Yeah.
antiperspirant is antiperspirant. But if it's a fine fragrance or a body spritz, then yeah, you can say, then you focus on what we call hedonics.
Yeah.
Punta
I think that's
Cana.
an excellent point.
And
Yeah.
that to me is and so you have that to me is more of, you could use our more, what do you call this, advanced techniques of fMRI to really look at how it's impacting the brain on the so desired feeling, which is either some kind of happiness or etc.
Yeah.
Right, and then push back to the houses to say, look, because it's a study, that you should accept an N of 10 or 20. Because a lot of times the numbers of, you have to give us 200 people to observe a thing, it was like it's sort of made up, and it's 200 people writing a note. They check all that apply.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, again, to answer your question, I would much rather have a smaller sample size with a more scientific approach than 200 people of garbage data. But
Yeah.
That makes sense.
that thought is completely radical, and it's not even spoken in our industry.
But it makes sense too, from, like you said, like a rational standpoint, to really figure out what is the utility of the product that we're trying to create, and then really go from there and let the research be guided by, what are the priorities of this research? What are our objectives? I think that was a great answer. I can't believe it, but the time has flown chatting with you. I want to make sure that we do have time to go through our game that we call React Attack. I know I briefed you a little bit on it, but for any of the listeners that have tuned in for the first time, it is a game that we like to play where it's rapid fire, implicit free association, where I'm just going to say a couple 10 random words and Jose is just going to say the first thing that pops into his head.
Let's just do 5. Let's see how I'm negotiating.
That is very Jose.
I'm going to secretly sneak with 10. So the first one, we're going to start with something pretty simple. Snacks.
Candy.
Marketing.
Bad.
Consumers.
Misunderstood.
Cologne.
Depends.
Branding.
Important.
Sugar.
Always nice to have.
Emotions.
You've got to be happy.
Consulting.
Challenging.
Coca-Cola.
Refreshing.
And the last one, you've already reached 10. Traveling.
New experience.
That's a great one.
Okay.
That's awesome. You did it. You did great. Jose,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that the listeners probably appreciated this. Michelle and I definitely appreciated this. If people wanted to reach out to you and chat with you more, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
It's complicated. My email's complicated, but I'd say the best is just to go through HCD.
Okay, that sounds
Just
great.
reach out to yourselves and you can forward it to me.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yes, I am.
Awesome.
Great.
So if you're interested, find him there. Go and link with Jose.
Or reach out to us and we can connect you.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Jose. I have really enjoyed our friendship over the years and how it's changed with both of our changing roles, but I'm so glad I got to know you all that time ago. I always find conversations with you really fun.
And likewise. Love you guys too.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Until next time. For more information or updates, follow HCD Research on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at HCD Research Inc. and at HCD Neuroscience. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to rate, review, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you and stay tuned for more curious conversations.